This week we wrap up our Qt application by adding a menu bar. Welcome to another MetPy Monday. Hello, I'm John Lehman, a software engineer for Unidata. This week we're going to go ahead and wrap up what we've been doing with Qt and tidy up our application a little by adding a menu bar that lets our user change from imperial units to metric, so between degrees Fahrenheit and degrees Celsius. So the first thing we're going to do up here in our imports is I need to add the QAction object. So we'll tidy up our line wrapping here, keeping these in alphabetical order, or very close to alphabetical order. Okay, and then I'm going to make my own attribute here, use imperial units, and I'm going to set it to false. Down here, after we've got all of our widgets set up, we're going to add a QAction, and we're going to add a menu bar. I'm going to call it button action, and it's going to be QAction. I'm going to put ampersand imperial units. You'll see why the ampersand here in just a little bit. And self. We'll be nice and set a status tip. It says change units. And if that is toggled on or off, we're going to connect a function, but we'll come back and fill that in just a little bit. We're also going to use the set checkable method to make this checkable. So we can click it and it will put a check by it. We're now working in imperial units. We can click it again and it will uncheck it. And we're now back to working in metric. We're going to create a menu by getting our menu bar attribute, which we are inheriting. I'm going to add a file menu by calling menu.addMenu. Again, our ampersand and file. And we'll come back to that ampersand in just a second. Now in that file menu, we're going to add an action, which is our button action. So adding that QAction object that we've created and configured. So now it's time to write our logic for what's going to happen, and then we'll come back up here and connect it. But we don't know what the function signature looks like yet, so we can't do it. All right, so I'm going to call this on unit button click self, and it's going to take the status of our button or our menu item or our action, whatever you want to call it. And we're going to need to alter a few things like the temperature label, the dew point label, and the wet bulb temperature label. And if we are checked, that means we're working with imperial units. So temperature label dot set text temperature degrees Fahrenheit. And we're going to repeat that. Dew point label set text dew point degrees Fahrenheit. Wet bulb temperature label set text wet bulb temperature and degrees Fahrenheit. And we can't forget to set our attribute that we created, self.use imperial units, is equal to true. I'm going to copy all of that. Instead of an if, I'm going to change this to an else. We're going to set it back to degrees Celsius. And we're going to set use imperial units to false. And while we're at it, we're going to need to modify our calculate wet bulb temperature. The unit that we're going to use for temperature in our calculation, first we'll set it to degrees Celsius, and then we'll say if self.use imperial units, we'll reset it to degrees Fahrenheit. Then we can multiply by U down here when we're passing things to our calculation, and call .to_u on our output. So we'll make sure that we're in Celsius or Fahrenheit. And of course, you could change the units to inches of mercury or whatever you'd like for the pressure as well. So now let's go back up to our connect. And if you remember, we have to use a lambda to pass multiple things to our slot. So remember, these are signals that are going to slots. Self dot and our on unit button click function. And it's going to take our button action. It's going to take our temperature label, our dew point label, and our wet bulb temperature label. All right, so those should be the things that we're looking at. So anytime that it gets toggled, we're going to call that function. So let's run it and see how we did. All right, so in our terminal, we Python the name of your application, and it looks like it's got a complaint that we need another comma here. All right, so here's our application, degrees Celsius. Let's press calculate, make sure it still works. We have a file menu, imperial units. I click that. All the outputs go to degrees Fahrenheit, and if I calculate again, we get an output in Fahrenheit. So we're working. We could change it to where when we toggle, it clears all of these so we don't accidentally think that we're looking at something in the wrong unit if we wanted to. But what about those ampersands? Well, if you press Alt, you'll notice that now I've got an underline on file right by the character that we put the ampersand in front of. So now if I press F, we see that now there's an underline under I, and I press I, and it does the same thing. So you're setting up those keyboard shortcuts for your user, which we know all programmers like keyboard shortcuts. I hope that you found this series of videos on using PySide 2 and Qt to create a simple GUI application useful. I'll see you on next week's MetPy Monday.